Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode number 30 of the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. My name is Patrick Norris. Our goal today is to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. I'm so glad you're with us. Today's episode's a great one. I'm joined with Brian Mavis, president of America's Kids Belong, as we get a window into how leading in orphan and foster care has made a radical difference. Brian and his organization are making a huge impact on adoptions in our nation. This show is going to grab your heart and remind you of the power of leadership. Before we jump into it, I want to invite you, your networks, and staff into one of our personal discovery experiences. Personal discovery experiences are 2-hour online events with me, a psychologist, therapist, and with a group of 6 to 20 peers as we discover the roots that drive individual stories. These training events are designed for those who want to know what drives them and to better equip those they lead. The next cohort for the general population is August the 9th. And the senior pastors cohort will be August the 10th. Our next cohort, designed for church ministry staff, is August the 17th. If someone struggles with addiction issues, our next one for addictive purposes is August 31st. To find out more, go to redinkrevival.com. If this podcast is adding value to your leadership in life, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this podcast, like it, and comment in the reviews at iTunes. Also, help us to get the word out by sharing on your social media platforms. Thank you for doing that. Go to redinkrevival.com and check out everything we're up to. And while you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post as well as our upcoming events. Go now to sign up. Let's go now to this week's episode number 30 with Brian Mavis on how leading in orphan and foster care has made a radical difference. Well, welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. Brian Mavis, it is so amazing to have you to be a part of this episode. I'm looking forward to digging down into your story and what you have to offer, bro.
Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Let me tell everybody who you are. First of all, you are the president of America's Kids Belong. You've served on church staffs and most recently as the pastor of Community Transformation. You're actually called a missionary to Christians, challenging church leaders to face the big issues of our culture. You've helped build and lead SermonCentral.com. You've actually written curriculum and sermons for a lot of national campaigns, one of which was Bono's One Sabbath campaign. That's so cool, man. Bono's the boss. And then Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ campaign and World Vision's Faith in Action campaign. Plus, you're married, have 2 daughters, and the girl you're married to is one of my very favorite people on the planet and happens to be my first cousin, Julie. Man, yes. It's awesome to have you with us. Well, hey, when we talk about America's Kids Belong, this is your passion. If you would, just help us understand first what it is and why is it such a big deal to you and Julie?
Yeah, so great question. And, in general, the America's Kids Belong is about the arena of orphan care and foster care specifically in the United States. And people, ask me sometimes, just like you did right now, like, why did I get into this? Why did I pursue orphan care and foster care? And I say, really, honestly, I didn't. I did not pursue this. What I did is I pursued Jesus, and he led me to kids who need moms and dads. And so I'm surprised to find myself here, but Jesus will do that to you. And really, the conviction is we believe kids belong in families. And we discovered as being foster parents that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands actually of kids who are growing up and being raised in institutions. And it's kind of an invisible crisis. And we just felt it was an injustice that kids were not being known and seen and overlooked and not being loved and being brought into a family. So he said, let's take on this injustice. And along the way, we had no intention of starting a nonprofit, but it became big enough that we had to. And then 5 years ago, what was a statewide nonprofit in Colorado moved into a national one. So what we do with America's Kids Belong is we leverage leaders like yourself, faith leaders, government leaders, which includes the governors, business leaders, to end the crisis for kids in foster care.
It's amazing. Of course, I've been able to get a backstage pass a bit to see what you're doing, and literally, my hair gets blown back, the little bit of hair I got left.
But you look like a hippie compared to me.
That's awesome, man. Well, it's true. We're getting older. But what you guys are doing is absolutely amazing. And didn't it all begin with you just pursuing Jesus, and the two of you and Julie, you had become foster parents? Is that how that happened?
Yeah.
And so you began to see things that other people don't see and feel things other people don't feel. Talk about that just for a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. So really, this goes back to Julie being in high school, going on a mission trip to Mexico in an orphanage, and really, not having pure intent. I think there was a boy she liked and wanted to travel to Mexico with and eat some tacos. And but while she was on this orphanage, she said God spoke to her, and it was a 3-word phrase: care for orphans.
Oh my God.
And she, at that moment, said she knew that was her purpose in life. So she did that a few times, in a few different orphanages, working throughout being a single young woman. Then we got married, and I ruined that for her. She followed my dreams, and we got to the place where we had 2 young daughters in elementary school, living in a nice neighborhood. Everything on the outside seems great, but she's feeling lost and purposeless. And she was like, how can I care for orphans in my circumstance of, suburban housewife? And so she asked a key question. She said, are there kids in America, are there orphans in America? Are there orphanages? And that led us into the world of foster care. And so we went to a meeting. We asked, how do kids get into foster care? Did they do something wrong? They're like, nope, that's not it. Their parents did. And what happened is their parents abused them severely or neglected them severely. Parents are typically addicts. Maybe they're in jail, maybe prostitution, all that kind of world. And when they said that, Julie was like, this light bulb went off for her. She said, I remember being on an orphanage and asking the executive director, how did all these kids' parents die? And he said, they're not dead. These kids have been abused and neglected. Their parents are in jail. They're prostitutes. They're addicts. And she said, they're the same kids. We just call it different words here. We call it the foster care system, and we have group homes and that kind of thing. So that was like, she was like, I can do my calling in life here in the United States. So we became foster parents, and then fast forward 2 years later. So that was in 2005, 2007. I was on staff at a church in Colorado, and a recruiter for the county called and said, can I talk to you about foster care in our county? I said, sure. So this lady, Cindy, came 2 days later, met in the lobby of our church, and the first thing she said to me was, thanks for meeting with me. I've been trying to meet with a pastor for 3 years. You're the first one to say yes.
Oh my gosh.
I apologize that had been her experience, but I also kind of knew in the back of my head, if she'd called 2 years earlier, I would have probably said no. Like, what's the church have to do with this? Yeah. So she came back in my office and she said, Brian, I really just came here to tell you one thing. In the 27-year history of foster care in this county, there's never been one single day, not one day, where kids have not been waiting for families to take care of them. They're sleeping in county buildings or in group homes. And she said, I have a challenge for you in your church. Help me change who waits. Help me recruit so many grown-ups that step up for these kids, that they're on the waiting list, not the kids. So it was one of those moments where you realize God is speaking through someone.
Wow.
And so said yes to the challenge, and we fulfilled it. We met the challenge, and a year later, we got a note from the county saying we had helped increase recruitment by 96% over that year. And just believed at that moment of like, well, if this can happen in one county at this time, why can't it happen in every county? So that's kind of how it started. And now this change who waits, that line has haunted me this whole time.
Wow. Wow. Well, in Colorado, I think there's two areas that you guys quantify. One is the area of kids in foster care who may not be available for adoption, and then those who are available for adoption. And when you got involved, when you really went to the deep end of the pool on it and started taking it throughout all of Colorado, you began to engage a lot of the churches in Colorado. You and Julie were gifted by God to shift those numbers radically. Do you remember off the top of your head what the percentages were, what the numbers were that you guys were able to do, and how you did it? It just blows my mind, with photographers in church lobbies and so on. Can you just kind of go there with all that?
Sure. So, yeah, you mentioned, if your listeners aren't familiar with the world of foster care, it's a big bucket, but they kind of kids go into basically two different groups. And the group that is, all of them go into with this kind of goal of reunification, but sometimes then they quickly discover that there's a group of these kids who should never go back to their home because of, the severity of abuse and those kinds of things. So they go into the, let's find an adoptive family for them. And basically it's nationwide. 3/4 go through reunification and 1/4 go to the adoption route. So in Colorado, when we started, there was about 800 kids who were in the adoption category. And we hosted a gallery that the state had just started, and it had like 20 some kids on the gallery, and our church hosted it. And I was grateful for it, and there was quite a buzz about it, but it was like, what about the other like 780 kids who need advocacy? So we leaned into that. We did photography, and we started writing their stories, and we started getting hundreds of kids stories told. And then a real game changer is we got permission to start doing videos of these kids, because we go to these photo shoots, and we'd see the things the kids said to us were heartbreaking or funny, and we're like, people could just see and hear what we see and hear. So we did that, and eventually, so over the next 6 years, the number of kids went from 800 down to 280, and that was with new kids coming in the system every week. So and really, it was this conviction that it wasn't that the church didn't care. It was just they were unaware. They didn't know that these kids were there. They heard of foster care, but it was like they were seeing real kids, and we were making them known. And really, it was this conviction that if the church just knew, the church would respond, and they did.
Yeah. Well, your entrepreneurial spirit, both you and Julie, the way you went about creating innovation, solutions for the problem is so cool. You somehow got a hold of some professional photographers and asked them if they would jump into what you were doing and capture the pictures. I'm not talking, like old school annual pictures. I'm talking about these amazing photographs of the children, their stories, And you would have these pictorial kind of artist exhibits in lobbies of churches with the pictures of the kids, and then parents or adults, couples could come in and they could maybe grab a slip of who that child was to begin a journey of just exploring interest. And what you have is this entire movement that has begun to happen. And if you did that in Colorado in that first year, I know the numbers have just multiplied since, not only in Colorado, but God's connected you with governors of other states. You have traveled with, A-list Christian music artists and been able to share your story there. The Duck Dynasty boys, you have had the privilege of hanging with those guys and being able to simply amplify your voice. I just believe that there is such a power in what you're doing. And I can tell you, for me as a pastor, I don't always know what to do. Even knowing that the problem exists, knowing the innovations to actually put on it, that's the tools, the resources. It can feel like an overwhelming project. Now, before we get into what goes into that as a solution, what pastors and government leaders or even marketplace leaders can do to address it, tell us a few stories of some of these kids in foster care, the beauty, the wonder, the mystery of who they are and the joy that you see in them and their resilience through it all. Can you think of a few stories that would just grab us?
Yeah, there's, I think, a myth that these kids are like in foster care because they did something bad or wrong, and they're in foster care because something happened to them, that what was done to them. So many of them have experienced woundedness that most of us will never see in our lives, fortunately. They've been neglected severely or abused and betrayed by people who were meant to care for them. So they're still being brave enough to say, I still want to trust adults. I still want to belong. I still want to be loved. And so, most recently, like a story is this boy named Michael. He went into the foster care system at 10 years old. He's 16 today. So basically was kind of forgotten in a sense for 6 years. And just a few months ago, right before the quarantine hit, we got to tell his story in Tennessee. Our Tennessee affiliate did this and videoed him. We put him on our social media, did a $10 boost, and out of that had 24 families inquire about adopting him.
Amazing.
And so what didn't happen for 6 years can be changed like that just by giving him a chance to speak for himself of like, here's who I am, and here's my dreams for my life and for having a family. We just started the same kind of work in Indiana. We did our first shoot out there. We did nine boys on one day, and then we posted a little collage of these 9 boys when we had the videos ready. And again, within 10 days, we had like over 200 families inquire on these 9 boys, again, who had essentially no one had been had asked about. So these kids really are they're kind of our own wounded warriors here, and the battlefield they were on, or it was at home, and they've survived it. And again, I think if we as leaders, as church leaders, had a deeper understanding of trauma and maybe viewed it empathetically, like we would view a child with cancer, and say, okay, these kids don't have cancer, but they do have trauma that's as real as that, and it's this deep soul wound. And if we could see the kids through that, what they're surviving and fighting, I think that empathy could help us a lot.
Amazing. When you talk about both the Tennessee and the Indiana situations, what comes into my mind is there's a process or a courtship. How would somebody who's interested, what's that look like for them to explore the interest of a candidate who could be up for adoption? How does that process move forward? Is it just a pretty quick decision and it's done? Or is there some level of relationship development, some level of pre-adoption connection? Does the foster child live in the home of the foster parents before adoption to kind of see how all of that fits? How does all that work?
Yeah, great question again. And first thing I need to say is it's different in every state, and sometimes it's different county to county inside a state. So if you're interested, kind of pursue your local opportunities. But in general, I would say that in most cases, there's kind of two paths you can take. One is working through the local government who has jurisdiction over these kids. And another path is called a private provider, and it's a contract that the government has with like a nonprofit. And so they will help you along the way. And again, in most circumstances, there's at least a 6-month getting to know you kind of phase. So the kid would move into your home, live with you for 6 months, and you're both saying, is this okay? Or are we still moving ahead? And it's you just, as the parent, I would say my advice is don't do this to fill a hole in your heart. Do this for it's not to build your family, it's to be a family for a kid who needs one. Sometimes when these kids start feeling really vulnerable and close to a family, they'll start sabotaging that because they're afraid to be hurt. And so it's important that the parents do their homework on learning about kids who've had that kind of betrayal and woundedness, so that their love will be patient.
Yeah.
And so I would say, as a parent, start investigating, learning, do your own homework.
Hi everybody, my name is Patrick Norris, and I'd like to introduce you to our Red Ink Revival Leadership Platform, where we offer resources and experiential discovery to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. We believe driven people ought to know what they're driven by. Odds are you're already a high achiever and a visionary. But what are you driven by? What are your teammates driven by? What is your organization driven by? If you've ever struggled to figure you out, to know what winds you up or shuts you down, if you've ever been mystified by teammates who are stuck in old patterns of thinking, control, codependence, risk-averse, grandiosity, and more, or if you have strived to change the culture of your organization, but somehow the opposing current has just been too strong, now more than ever, understanding the drivers behind your life really matters. Your leadership journey to wholeheartedness begins with our flagship free webinar, Driven People, Driven Leaders. This hour-long training is with inspiring and fresh insights from neuroscience, psychology, and theology to help you grow in wholeheartedness in every sphere of life. Go to redinkrevival.com today and find out more. For all my pastor friends, how would you like to co-host a Driven People, Driven Leaders webinar with me? If you want to invest in other pastor friends, inviting a group of your colleagues and networks, we'd love to set that up with you. All you have to do is get 5 to 10 or more senior pastors rallied to jump on with you, and we'll create a private showing just for your tribe. And it's free. Go to redinkrevival.com/pastors to check it all out. While you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post, and then subscribe to our weekly podcast at redinkrevival.com.
And so much, Patrick, of what you do is so important for everybody, again, doing your own work on your own life.
Yes.
So that you can help listen to these kids without putting it through the filter of your own woundedness.
Yes.
And so, the stuff you're doing is incredibly vital.
I was just thinking about that on the way in today, that if you do the work that is necessary on you, you do your deeper root system work.
Yes.
Everybody becomes a much easier relationship for you, because
Absolutely.
you are aware of what you're doing. And sometimes we are so eager to get a neurochemical feeling of connection that we hotwire those connections. And the more you learn about who you are, the more you learn about why you're driven like you're driven, it will allow you then to say, wait a minute, some of those desires I have to get this hotwire need met is going to set me up for pain. And that doesn't mean I don't move forward, but I realize that the connection needs to be not about hot wiring or meeting some kind of fragile need in me, but it's actually about, I want to connect with them to, just have a relationship and to move forward. That's in every area, whether you're a husband and wife or whether you're a parent, no matter where you are. And I do want to kind of come back around to something you were saying there. We know that trauma is a very significant part of the profile of a foster child. And when a child has trauma, they have irrational behaviors. They don't even fully understand. In fact, they don't understand them at all.
Right.
But they can be pretty intense and pretty extreme. We also know that there are significant percentages and a lot of research done on families who adopt, the impact that it has on the marriage, the impact it has on the individuals, the stress levels, because if a person hasn't done their own trauma work, it can surface stuff in them they had no idea was even there. And yet we hold this tension, right, Brian? We've got this deal where that's real, and that scares some of us from entering into the world of foster care or adoption. And yet foster care and adoption is the heart of Jesus. And it's in our heart. If we just peel everything back, something's deep within us desiring to meet that need and to help and to serve and to just recognize this fallen world and the humanity that is here, and that they've been victimized by so many things. And we can be the Good Samaritan. We can be, and it's not just Good Samaritan, like you said, to meet some need in us. It's just recognizing we're put on this planet to love people. And not love them in social media posts, but to love them in blood, sweat, and tears. So we hold that together. If you're talking to, parents, couples, pastors, who, have some level of understanding of the amount of work, the stress level, the impact it can have on the family dynamics, how do you talk to them to help them move forward and yet to be sober-minded as they are?
Well, this is a fear that church leaders have of, like, if I go into this, or am I going to mess up my church? And it's like, well, yeah,
yeah,
but in a good
that's
way.
real. That's real.
And we do say we'd like for you to do a few things. One is that any family that opens up their heart and home to these kids, that it could be messy, but it doesn't have to be lonely. So surround this family.
Great word.
With other people who can be helpers to them and help lift that load. And so that's one thing. Another thing is it's an opportunity to you become motivated to learn about your stuff, your trauma, your and to recognize, or at least to begin to start having the eyes to recognize trauma in these kids and how not to repeat it, how to actually heal it. And it really comes to this point, Pat, where I have this deep conviction that it's like, yes, I mean, our instinct is these kids need families, of course. I would say they need the church. But I've come to have a deep conviction that the church needs these kids to be the kind of church God wants the church to be. And having these kids into your church, into your family, will make you a better human. It could be hard. It could be hard on your marriage, but these stressors will give you opportunities to deal with things that were there already.
Yeah.
They just got pulled to the surface.
Amazing.
So I would say, do your work. And again, all that work, you said this before, all that work isn't just for the benefit of the kid who's been hurt. It'll be beneficial to every relationship you have.
Yeah, it's growth.
Basically, you're better at love.
Yeah, it's growth. It's the biblical model of growth.
Yeah, which
is so interesting, right? Because most of us come from Christian traditions that emphasize behavior, and the next thing you know, you are looking at perfection as the standard and flawlessness as the standard, and nowhere in the Bible does it ever tell us that. We're told to grow. That is our basic one step in front of another mission, is to grow. And you gave a great word there. That's compelling to help people process through some of these fears. I will give a plug for Red Ink Revival in case anybody, they're new to the podcast as we're talking about it. Right now, we are putting together business models or ways to really facilitate people in different sectors of life. Pastors would be one, schools and school administration would be one. But even for foster care parents, this is something that if you do need to do the work, we have a free webinar that we do for 1 hour. Then it leads into what's called a personal discovery experience, where my team of psychologists and therapists take groups of people together, particularly if they're in their same theme. Like, again, school and school administration, they would be in one area. Pastors, of course, they want to have their own cohort to be able to process life with peers. In the same kind of way, foster parents, as you said, churches would really be benefited if they recognize that we're all in this together and they had support within it. Well, if you have a bunch of foster care parents who are doing the work on themselves, they could come to one of our webinars that's free, it's online, and then they could do a personal discovery experience. It's a 2-hour event, again, where the work of fleshing out their own root systems and traumas, their own griefs and losses that have built energy pockets that drive them, we can certainly take them by the heart and the hand and lead them into their future. So again, I just wanted to plug that, because people often, especially with therapists and psychologists, they don't know where to go. It's like, well, who do I go to? Where do I start? Are they all the same? Is every therapist, on equal footing? I don't know. Is it credible, not credible? And so all those questions create stuckness. Everybody they just get stuck. And they're like, well, until I figure something out, I'm not going to do anything. Well, we want to take all of that cementing and that stuckness away. We want to give you freedom to be able to explore, and Red Ink Revival is that resource. Let's talk now about churches. What what can churches do? What can we as leaders do? What does that look like for us to come alongside this issue and really help it? And maybe another question that I need to ask you that probably is better to hit before that question is that when you solve the adoption issue, the foster care issue, you solve that issue, you've solved some amazing societal issues. Let's hit that, and then we'll come back to the churches.
Yeah, I like to think about, foster care is kind of this hub, and then there's all these spokes that go out past it. And so, or another way to think about it, foster care is kind of the spider and everything else is the web. And so when kids are in foster care and they end up not getting connected to a family, they're staying in these institutions, they age out. 1 in 4 will experience PTSD, which is more than twice the rate of military combat veterans. So again, they've had their own combat. And of course, then that trauma leads to all other things. So they're 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. They are the majority of the pipeline for sex trafficking in the United States. A lot of times we think of sex trafficking coming from Eastern Europe or Asia. It's mostly coming from the foster care aging out and before they age out group.
Amazing.
A third struggle with addiction. Less than half will graduate from high school. About a third will continue to live in poverty and homeless, and joblessness. About half will be homeless within a few years of aging out. Nearly half the males will spend some time in jail. The girls are 3 times more likely to be pregnant by 19 than their peers. And then here's the kicker. They're more likely to lose their children to foster care than any other demographic in the United States, starting the whole thing all over again. So I like to think of it this way, especially to put it to church leaders. Like, if your church has a prison ministry, thank God for it. A homeless ministry, yes. A crisis pregnancy ministry, for sure. I mean, all those things. We need those things and thank God for them. But wouldn't it be good if we could go upstream and help these kids not need those ministries 10 years from now?
Amazing. That makes so much sense. And yet, most people have never connected those dots. Like you talking about sex trafficking. So many of us in ministry today, we think about that. And of course, we think about the pain and the suffering that goes on in a young child that is exploited. And so that becomes a real, energy point. Let's make sure that we're helping sex trafficking issues. But like you said, what if we went upstream another, 100 feet? What if we began to deal with the issue at its birth, where it begins?
Yeah. What if we help that child not ever have to experience that sex trafficking? So, yeah, I think, this isn't just a heart issue. It's a smart one. Oops.
Come on. That's a word right there, man.
It can be this hard issue, but it's a smart one. Like, if we just got upstream, we could tackle a lot of these societal issues. And this is, again, back to when I was a community transformation pastor. We had like all these programs and all these, and I got to the conviction that most of what we were doing was a mile wide and an inch deep. It was transactional and not incarnational, transformational. Wow. And I just thought, what if we just went deep in one area that affected a lot of these other things? And so that was the switch we made. We went from 60 partners to just a few.
That's amazing. And your phrase was, it's not just heart, it's smart.
Yes.
That's a T-shirt. So churches, what do we do to help churches? How do we get churches, when we think as pastors or church leaders, How do we actually address this in our context?
Well, I'd say the first thing is research, and start inside your church. You might be shocked to find out who in your church was in the foster care system as a youth, who in your church already is fostering, or who has adopted, or who is a caseworker or a court-appointed special advocate. So I would just start with who in our church has any experience in this right now, and what you'll discover if you start looking into the people who are currently doing it or who did it and quit, is you're going to find out, if you ask, how are you doing? They're going to say, help. We need help. We really want to do this. It's the most meaningful thing we've got in our lives, is in our expression of our faith, but it's harder than we thought. And again, so I would say start with your flock and make sure you're taking care of them. And so when you find somebody who's taking on this huge ministry, surround them with a few other families. And then, so I call it research, retain, recruit. And so by doing that research, then you work on that retention, because half of foster families quit within a year.
Oh, wow.
And so, but you can totally change that number. We've seen it. You can go from, recruiting. If you got 10 families, you'll only have 5 next year. But if you surround them with other families, you'll have 9 still next year. And they get better. They start learning more about trauma and all that. So then that's the retention side. And then finally, you can recruit more families into this to help close that gap, because most counties have, dozens of foster families and hundreds of kids. And so that gap needs to be closed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So research is my answer. Research your church. And then if you want to look beyond that, then research your community. Who in your community is the people you need to learn from and talk to.
Excellent. Well, when it comes to the dream that you have, if you wanted to just make something dramatic, something huge to blow out, I mean, if you could just sit back and fantasize, man, this could give us massive opportunities. What are you dreaming about, and how do you, if you could have anything, what would you like to see happen? I'm going to change my answer. You let me know that this question was coming, and I was going to say, if we could just get every governor to make this a platform issue, but I'm not going to say that. I have found at times easier to meet with a governor than to meet with a pastor. It goes back to this lady who said, I've been trying to meet with a pastor for 3 years. You're the first one to say yes. If we could get our senior pastors to see this as God's heart as a key justice issue, and if they could learn enough about it that they would preach on it, and we could help equip them with that, and they would have this commitment that we're going to solve this in our city. If the church doesn't do it, nobody else is showing up. Yeah.
I mean, well, except for pimps. They'll be there for the kids. And so I would say if the game changer would be if churches decided to get serious and say, we're going to solve this issue in our city. We're going to change who waits in our city. This is God's heart. We're going to preach on it. We're going to do it well. We'll be responsible. When it gets hard, we'll get better. And if I could wave a magic wand, every church would be trauma informed. They would learn about trauma. And trauma, to put it in the biblical language, is the wound that comes from sin.
Yeah.
And sin that was done unto a person. Sometimes it's self-inflicted after that, and those wounds come from the outside. So that would be a game changer. If the church got serious about this, this is solvable. Yeah. What happened in one county can happen in every.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that would be your dream, and that would be your biggest challenge in helping onboard pastors to understand what it is and how to take a next step. So how would pastors get a hold of you for those resources? What would that be like? How does somebody, get the tools?
Yeah, so online. So we've got a website. It's the first two initials of America, amkidsbelong.org, and then you can do America's Kids Belong on Facebook and Instagram and follow us. But on the America's Kids Belong website are free resources on how to research this well, how to do Foster Parents Night Out, which is basically like a 4-hour VBS for foster kids, and how to do wraparound for supporting those families, how to preach on this in a really responsible way, how to do a next steps event with your city and county officials. So all that's there. It's all free.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, if you would, take just a couple of minutes and speak directly to the heart of pastors, young leaders, marketplace leaders. What would be kind of your call to action? What are you going to encourage them to do?
Yes. So I got this from advice from a social worker in Texas. She said to me a few years ago, "Have you ever heard of the African proverb that says, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers?" And she said, we have got to quit fighting with the church because it's the kids who are suffering and no one else. And so I would say to marketplace leaders, political leaders, faith leaders, we have got to come together. Maybe we're not fighting, but we're definitely not pulling together. We're not cooperating. And so it would be to come together. It would be for the faith community to go to the government, the child welfare area, and just say, we're sorry we haven't been here. Can we learn from you? I'll be honest. Child welfare, their view of the church typically is the church has been on the holy hill and we've been down in the ditch with the wounded.
Wow.
And so the church to come and say, we're sorry we haven't been here, we're learning, and we want to help. The marketplace leaders, I think they think, well, this is for somebody else, and I want them to know, no, this is for someone like you. Yeah. And so you can learn about, you can make your business more foster friendly with foster families who bring in kids, making sure you're wrapping around them. We have martial arts places that provide free services to kids, hair salons, free services to kids, retail stores with discounts to foster families. So if everybody come together and just say, we see you kids, we see you families who are stepping up, and we're going to be here for you. So my advice to these leaders is come together and pull in the same direction, and it'll be remarkable what can happen.
Amazing. Well, that's gold, brother. That's gold. I sure love you, Brian, and make sure you give Julie my whole heart. You guys are some of my very, very favorite people. Look forward to getting to hang again sometime. Looking forward to all of our audience being able to access your content and soberly just walking this out together. And
yours as well. And they need, again, the stuff you're doing about trauma and is critical.
So true.
Whether you're a foster parent or not.
Oh, it's so true. Well, I grew up in a pretty safe home, and I got trauma.
Still stuff. Yeah. Still got stuff.
Everybody has it. Well, cool, man. Well, I look forward to connecting again, and we'll have you on in the future, and we'll pick this conversation up. But thanks again, Brian, for being on.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you for joining us. You might be wondering what's next. Consider attending one of our webinars, personal discovery experiences, masterclass experiences, or retreats. Also, subscribe to this podcast at any podcast provider and YouTube. Go to RedInkRevival.com to find out all the unique opportunities to grow your life and leadership. And while you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post. Everything we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our tribe, and I can't wait till our next episode. I'm glad that you're with us today. We'll see you next time.